This is the Ted Wallachian Podcast. Brought to you by Halenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland locations. Halenda's, the way sausage should taste. And Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted Wallachian.
The book is called Promo Man, Backstage Tales from the Vinyl Jungle. The author is Bob Klanac, and the subject is Nick Panaseiko. They both join me now, courtesy of this fabulous technology we know and love as Zoom. Gentlemen, how are you?
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Great.
Absolutely fantastic here too.
I truly enjoyed reading the book. There's just a whole whack of great stories from literally every imaginable artist in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, from Elvis Presley, right, almost, at least Elvis's dressing room door sign, through to the Supremes, the Rolling Stones, you name it. First of all, let's go back and find out how this book came to be. Bob, your association with Nick goes back how far?
Quite a bit. I was asked to do an article for a London, Ontario magazine called The History of London Music. Mm-hmm. And every single person I talked to said, have you talked to Nick Panaseiko? Have you talked to Nick Panaseiko? Well, I did. And then I got to know, oh my goodness, this guy was the guy. Years passed. And then I ran into Nick about, 5-6 years ago when he was back in town, and we connected. And then we decided to go for a beverage one night with a friend of mine, just it was in the music business, Chris Drossos, our friend Megan Schroeder, and the two of us. And I was kind of like sizing him up, and he was sizing me up. And I said, I hear you doing a book. He says, yeah. You want to write it? And I said, yeah. So that's how it started.
And Bob, how long has this been percolating in your mind, this autobiography?
About 4 years. From the fall of 2018. Well, no, I guess that would make it. It was 2017. I can't recall. But it's about 3 to 4 years.
And Nick, is this something that you've been wanting to do for a while?
Well, you've got all these great stories. Unfortunately, it was a job. A lot of people figure that you're hanging out with the stars as a groupie, but in the meantime, they don't realize that what you're doing is taking care of business and making sure that the spotlight is on Mick Jagger or Donna Summer or whoever, not on you.
Mm-hmm. Now, the story begins in London, Ontario, but really it begins in Europe prior to that, because your family, originally from Ukraine, fled Ukraine during an oppressive period in time, just following few years following the Holodomor, the man-made famine, which was had killed millions and millions of people. And you ended up in a refugee camp in Germany, correct?
Yes, in the Red Cross camp, and of course we were known as displaced persons, DPs at that time, with a deal that provided if your father went to work in a mine in Belgium for a year, you could then bring your family to Belgium, which we spent 3 years before we immigrated to Canada in 1950.
So when you first came to London, it was your parents chose London. Why London?
Well, there was already a community being built in London with a few friends from the Red Cross camp had already settled, and it seemed like the opportune place to be. We were offered to go to the United States originally, but the borders were closed, and consequently we were put on a train and ended up in lovely London, Ontario.
And London, Ontario, at during that point, it was pretty much a sleepy town. Insurance company headquarters, Liberace, I think, were headquartered in London at the time, but it wasn't exactly what you would consider to be showbiz mecca.
No, it wasn't. But I started at about 10 years old, thinking that I was going to be Elvis Presley or Marty Robbins or whoever with the white sports coat and the pink carnation. Realizing that when I picked up the guitar and went to guitar lessons with Edith Hill Adams, who later taught Tommy Hunter, I realized that I wasn't going to go to the callus on the finger bit and after 4 lessons decided that there's got to be another way to enter the business.
I'm talking to Nick Panaseiko, who is he's the star of the book Promo Man, and the book is written by Bob Klanac, who has joined us as well. Let's talk about, I'm going to just hit on 4 or 5 or 6 different, because I don't want to give the whole book away here, but I want to give people an idea of the kinds of stories and the kinds of people that you dealt with. I found it interesting that the book opens up with a story regarding Keith Moon from The Who. And I thought, well, that's an interesting choice, because the first story they deal with, at the end of the chapter, the guy dies. What a bummer way to start off a book. Why did you choose Keith Moon?
Well, I can answer that. I originally wrote the book as a narrative, and a friend of mine, a former London Free Press columnist and writer and editor, most importantly, read the book and kind of went, if I'm going to read a book about rock and roll, I don't want to read about the Ukraine in the first chapter. I wanted stories. So he gave me the brilliant idea of sort of dividing it up into stories. Like, in other words, we open with Keith Moon, we kind of grab you. And then we kind of go to maybe, I think, the Supremes one, and then we go back into a bit of a history. So you kind of like, and it really, really transformed what the book was. And I'm really pleased with the way it turned out, as opposed to doing a straight narrative.
Now, Nick, when you look back, do you consider yourself to be more of a promoter or a record hustler? Or, as Ronnie Hawkins called you, the best record hustler I've ever seen?
Well, it's a combination of the two. You had to hustle to try to get your song on, of course, the main station, Chum, but it went up through a ladder. You had to get airplane Peterborough, London, and then with Nevin Grant and Hamilton before it would even surface on the Chum charts. And of course, once it's on the Chum charts, you gave the sales guys an opportunity to stock product.
You hear stories of artists being temperamental and some of the wild riders that come with their contracts, asking for champagne and caviar and no red M&Ms and things like that. But more than once in your time while promoting concerts, you ran into artists who demanded cash before they perform. Chuck Berry was one of those. Well,
yes, Chuck was unique, but I mean, that just wasn't a precedent that he set for Toronto. Every concert that he did, he arrived with his guitar and a suit bag and ready for cash to be paid. And of course, we had the incident in Toronto where we had to come up with somebody that would cash a $5,000 check before he'd go on stage.
And of course, the banks were closed, and you went to, I believe you went to Sam Snyder and Sam the Record Man to get the check cashed, correct?
Yes, we did. The shows at Convocation Hall with George Thorogood opening, and consequently, as I said, we brainstormed who would have $5,000 on a Sunday.
Yeah. Now, why do you suppose that there are artists who insisted on the cash in advance? Do you think it's because at the beginning of their career they may have been ripped off 600 or 700 times?
Well, I think Chuck was a rarity. I don't recall any other act that I had an encounter with that demanded payment before they went on stage. Then, of course, Chuck controlled the stage by a 3-piece group that he would hire individual musicians. As far as Chuck was concerned, if you didn't know a Chuck Berry song, you weren't in the band.
And I gather that went on through to when Chuck and Keith Richards did that film, Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll. And he demanded payment for that upfront too,
You say in the book, you say one of the worst artists I ever worked with was Bill Cosby. Why? I mean, looking back now, it's easy. It's easy to understand, but why in your experience?
Well, it's just the incident that happened with a kind gesture on the behalf of the Spinners, us getting a nice box of Cuban cigars for him, giving him the cigars, him pulling me aside in the trailer and telling me to get those N Boys out of the trailer and never have the N Boys ever open this show again for him.
Why would a black entertainer demand that the opening act, who are black musicians, leave and refer to them with the N word? Why would he do that? What would possess something like that? Possess a man to do something like that?
Bill Cosby, I don't think he has the mind he can figure out I believe he put himself on a pedestal above everybody else. He was hot at the time during his TV shows. He had everything happening for him. And of course, basically, it was a comedy act.
Yeah, if I could just add something to it, Ted, my view was that he and Sidney Poitier were the acceptable face of Black America at the time,
right?
TV and movies. And and even after, and this incident does not surprise me in context, because after that, when any young Black kids were coming up, he would criticize them for the way they dressed, the way they talked, the way they did everything. He had this sense of how, I think, he wanted, how Black people should behave. And also, I think he wanted to separate himself from an old school Black act, kind of like something that one could accuse of being from a minstrel background, like dancing and everything. And he wanted to be the new face of Black America. And I think he did not like being associated as being Black, and therefore opening for, having a Black act open for him. He wanted to be seen as not Black in that sense. Now,
for Nick, if he was one of the worst acts that you ever worked with, conversely, one of your favorites who became a good friend of yours was Liberace.
Liberace was great. I got to know Liberace through his manager, Seymour Heller. Liberace was rare. He was one of the rare acts that came into Toronto quite a few times a year that would remember your name and your last name, and just be open to anything that you had. Of course, we used to call him the king of lobby sales because he sold more glasses and scarves and trinkets in the lobby during his intermission than tickets sometimes. That's
commonly referred to as merch or merchandise, which is very common today for especially younger musicians when they appear at the Horseshoe, or whether it be El Macombo or wherever it may be. That merchandise makes up a big part of their revenue stream now. And back then, that was not very common. And would it be fair then to say that he was sort of the father of merchandise?
Well, we presented him with a gold record to that Red King of Lobby Sales. So, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so that's great. Seymour Heller his manager had a tremendous effect on you.
Fantastic. He actually really guided me in, once again, throwing the spotlight on the act, whether it be backstage or whether it be at an interview, to make sure you primed whoever was going to meet Liberace. Of course, at that time, it was pretty well hidden that he was a gay at the time, and the issues that happened coming up with him as his AIDS progressed.
The word had leaked that he, in fact, had AIDS, and Seymour begged the columnist, I can't remember what publication it was, not to run the story. And then they made up some story because he had lost a lot of weight, saying it was because Liberace was on a watermelon diet. Did anybody believe that? Anybody would believe that?
Well, then, as you know, the trade papers, whether it be the National Enquirer, in this case, it was the Star. I mean, these are tabloids that are sitting in the grocery aisle waiting for you to check out. And of course, the more absurd the headline, the more copies you're going to sell.
Mm-hmm. You remained friends with Seymour Heller years after Liberace passed.
Yes, very much so, actually. He came up to Deerhurst when I was doing the Deerhurst promotion to catch our Vegas-style show, and helped me out in the U.S. to try to place our show, where eventually we end up placing Eddie the Eagle, who was the unknown British skier on the Johnny Carson show.
Mm-hmm. You talk about going up to Huntsville, and there was a young lady there, last name Twain, who has managed to carve herself a hell of a career. Shania Twain, who wasn't Shania when you first met her.
No, she was Eileen Twain, and at the time we didn't need another singer in the show, but Deerhurst was going through a sale at the time to Apotex Drugs, Barry Sherman, and she caught their attention, and decided that she was going to rebuild the show into a Broadway show that lasted for about 4 months, but gave her the opportunity to showcase her talent to a Nashville lawyer that ended up getting her signed with Mercury.
And how was she to work with?
Well, she was very, very closeted. She stuck to herself mostly, although she wasn't mom's apple pie either. We had a few run-ins with her and the drummer from the band.
More of the Ted Wallachin Podcast after this.
Hey, let me take a moment to tell you about my friends at Helenda's. They are the meat people. You know, I've been a fan of their products for years now, and without a doubt, they make some of the best sausage in Ontario. They are multiple award winners, having captured the Ontario's Finest Meat Competition's coveted Award of Excellence on 3 occasions, in addition to dozens of individual product awards. Helenda's has also received the Grand Champion ribbon at the past 2 Royal Winter Fair's ready-to-eat meat snack competitions. So whether you're preparing a charcuterie board or a full-blown sit-down dinner for your friends or family, you'll find Helenda's award-winning products at fine meat shops throughout the province, now including selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland stores, along with their 7 Helenda's locations. Their barbecued kielbasa is my favorite. On a fresh bun with horseradish, it is out of this world. But don't just take my word for it. Judge for yourself. On your barbecue, in your kitchen, or straight from the refrigerator. Helenda's, the way sausage should taste. Okay, here we go down to visit our friend Tom Mahalik at Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market in Toronto. Tom, of course, has the best selection of suits in the city of Toronto. But now that the winter is upon us, Tom, you need to put something on top of that beautiful suit when you go outside, and you've got some great coats.
We have some great coats that are 50 off. I just like to tell you guys a little story. I was going to switch the car at night, but then I changed my mind. I leave early in the morning, and I said to my wife, "Don't worry, darling, I will move the cars." Well, I went and I moved the cars. Took me about an hour. I had my sport jacket on, my beautiful sweater, and my scarf. But it wasn't enough. I was freezing. So in between trying to move the cars, I said, I got to go back to the house and grab one of those coats, one of those fabulous Tom's Place coats that are 50% off. Huge selection of coats that are 50% off, and they're only $249. I grabbed one of those coats. I put it on. I went back to the car. I didn't know how to reverse it. It took me another half an hour. But it was fine because I had my coat, I had my sweater, I had my scarf, I had my beautiful sport jacket, and a warm pair of pants. So it didn't bother me. So my wife asked me in the morning, "Tom, what took you so long?" Well, I said, I didn't know how to reverse it. I'll never do it again. I will listen to my wife, and I will switch while she's still there.
Tom's Place. Drop by. Coats, suits, jackets, sweaters, everything you need for the cold weather. 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market.
Now back to Ted and his guest.
During your time as a promoter, and I'm speaking with Nick Panaseiko, who is the theme is the focus of the book Promo Man, Backstage Tales from the Vinyl Jungle, as written by Bob Klanac. They're both joined me here. During your time in the industry, you had at least one run-in with the law, and that had to do with the promotion of a Queen album, where you hired a couple of strippers from the Zanzibar Tavern, which is a known peeler bar here in Toronto, or was. I don't even know if it's still around, to be honest with you. So tell me about that.
Well, to promote Fat Bottom Girls in an album called Jazz, which was totally insane to call an album Jazz for Queen. And came up with something unique to try to draw some attention. So we ended up putting a major banner up. It was December the 8th, a cold winter day. Hired the 2 girls. They ended up stripping out front of the store, peddling bicycles, and of course, got dressed as the police arrived. Just before
the police arrived, they put their tops back on, so no charges laid.
No charges laid, but we would have been happy if Chargers would have been late. We would have got more coverage.
Yeah, I kind of get that feeling reading the book that you were kind of hoping, boy, why couldn't they bust this? We could have got a little bit more ink out of this. But then there's the story of another guy who did get busted and got an awful lot of ink from it. That was Keith Richards when the Stones. Keith Richards got busted for possession of heroin, consequently leading to a concert. How did it turn into a concert? His fine and he could have been facing jail time.
Yeah, well, Bob knows more about that research of the young blind girl that convinced the judge that Keith had a health issue as opposed to a dealing issue, and to not reprimand him as he would if Keith was a dealer, but treat him as a patient that needed help.
So his what Keith referred to as his angel. His angel of mercy, angel of mercy, I think it was. Pardon me.
So this woman, she approaches the judge and says, "Why don't you have him do a concert for the CNIB as punishment?" And the judge thinks this is a great idea. So now you move forward and you hire a local, and now this is being done. Why in Oshawa? Was it not supposed to be originally like at Varsity Stadium or Varsity Arena?
Yeah, according to Cliff Lorimer, who's quoted in the book, and also Rob Bowman had the Grammy-winning musicologist. He had the opinion that it ultimately was supposed to be at a facility run by the blind, and then it was going to be at Varsity Stadium. Then they couldn't get it, and then they quickly moved to the larger Oshawa facility, which I think held 5,500 at the time. So they did 2 shows there.
Mm-hmm. And you had a local disc jockey who was blind as the MC, and he ran into a situation with Mick Jagger's daughter, I believe, something to do with the program, which was printed in Braille.
Yes, Jade, Mick Jagger's daughter, and Marlon Richards, Keith Richards' son, had Cliff read the program that was in Braille. Unfortunately, when they got to Mick Jagger's name, it was spelled Mac Jagger, and consequently, Mick wouldn't let the program be released. Myself and a couple other people got a copy of it, and that was it.
You dabbled for a short period of time in the nightclub industry, in that you opened up a club called The Image, but it didn't last very long. When you look back, why?
Well, it was during the period when the drinking age was 21. We were looking to fill a void between 16 and 21 that everybody pretended to be. So we were bringing in groups like Grant Smith and the Power, Jimmy Ruffin, who had a hit, What Becomes of a Broken Heartache. Yep. And we were trying to create a scene in London where you would dress up to go out for a night and enjoy a top act that usually would be playing Campbell's or the Brass Rail in London at the time.
You were responsible for promoting. I mean, we were talking about all of the big artists that you've dealt with over the years, but you were responsible for championing a lot of great Canadian talent. I'm thinking people like George Oliver, Dominic Triano, Ronnie Hawkins, as I mentioned in there. I mean, he was certainly around and working at the time that you were as well. What are your thoughts on some of this great Canadian talent and to the level to which they succeeded, and should they have been more successful? Should a guy like George Oliver have become as big as Burton Cummings?
Well, he should have been. Likewise, a group like Motherlode should have been big as Hootie and the Blowfish or some of the other acts in that era that were writing basically the same style material. Unfortunately, Toronto bands suffered from not having great management available to them, and record companies that had a limited budget to promote them.
And there was the Canadian content rules that first came in. When that was first introduced, meaning that radio stations had to play 30% Canadian music, when it was first introduced, what were your thoughts? Did you think it was a good thing or a bad thing?
I thought it was a great thing. Unfortunately, most of it was played in the midnight hour.
Yeah.
So, until they established a rotation of playing the hits on the hour within the daytime format, a lot of the acts that had Canadian content weren't really gaining much from the airplay that they got.
Talk to me about Elvis Presley and how you almost met him.
Well, with Elvis,
Well, actually, I'm going to ask Bob to tell the story, because Bob will tell the story from a different perspective. That being, how ballsy of a guy you actually were, Bob.
Oh, my God. Well, you've nailed it there, Ted. He absolutely was. I mean, he was this young kid. How old were you then? Like 22, 23. He's in Vegas seeing his friend. Who was it? It wasn't George Oliver. It was Grant Smith. And so he decides he wants to go sort of meet Elvis Presley. He goes backstage, and he's going to see if maybe he can get his tambourine or something. And then he comes up to the door, and the dressing room is locked, so no tambourine. So he grabs the Elvis Presley sign off of the door. I mean, that's the sign of a true fan. That's what I really like about that story.
That's a sign of a true thief.
Well, semantics, Ted.
Semantics. That's true. The book is filled with all kinds of great stories, and if you're a fan of the music industry and the history of the music industry, there's plenty here for you. Easy. There's probably another book somewhere inside you too, my guess, Mr. Panaseiko.
Well, I tell you, it took a long time to get the brain working to remember these stories, so I have to do some bouncing around, and at 75, trust me, things are fading.
and that was actually kind of a fun challenge too, because I kept bringing up things. I mean, there was an anecdote in there about him and Peter Tosh that came late in the game. I'm going, oh my God, this is a great story, And
share that story.
Jimmy, yeah, Jimmy Cliff. Oh, the one with he's got Peter Tosh. He's got Peter Tosh, and the entire band came down, even though it was only a press junk. Because apparently, according to Nick, the whole band traveled as a family, and so they're all staying at the Colonial Inn down on Yonge Street there, and so then there's no gigs. But anyway, so they go do some press. Nick picks them all up after Peter does some press at Chum. And then he drives them to the airport. They get to the airport, and Nick is just sort of seeing them off and getting them in. And Peter leans over and said, oh, by the way, Nick, I left you a little gift in the trunk. Nick goes to the trunk, opens it up. What is there, Nick? A pound of weed, I think, in there?
Pretty close to it.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
He can admit the story now. As I said, it's a great story. The book is filled. I highly recommend it if you like music and you like great stories. Pick it up. It's called Promo Man: Backstage Tales from the Vinyl Jungle, and it comes to us courtesy of Bob Klanac and Nick Panaseiko. Thank you, gentlemen, both. All the best to you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Meeting you again, Ted.
All right.
Take care.
The Ted Wallachin Podcast has been brought to you by Halenda's, the Meat People. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortinos, and Foodland locations. Halenda's, the way sausage should taste. And Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallachin Podcast is produced by Joey Roselli. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. I'm Becky Coles. Submit your questions and comments to ted@twmedia.ca.